Hi, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Wild Wild Podcast. My name is Adrian Smith, and I am here with my co-host, Rod Barnett. How are you, Rod?
I am doing pretty well.
Good. We were just talking, and the time of recording is coming up to the end of June, and so the film company, or the DVD company, Severin, in America, have been making all kinds of exciting Italian announcements, which are things that they're going to be releasing for their sale next week.
Yes.
And I thought perhaps we could start, because some of them have relevance to our well, perhaps they all really have relevance to our podcast. But the major announcement that they just made this week was Blood for Dracula, which they're releasing in a UHD, which is a format I have yet to upgrade to, and perhaps never will. Although I said that about Blu-ray, so who knows? But yeah, Blood for Dracula. What do you think about that finally getting a release?
Well, I'm pretty darned excited, mainly because those are such that pairing of films, Blood of Dracula and Flesh for Frankenstein, often known as the Andy Warhol blank and blank. I'm not the biggest fans of them, but they do hold a special place in my heart. I think they're kind of fascinating. My history with them is spotty, but my enthusiasm for them coming out on well, at least on Blu-ray, I also have not upgraded and see no future in which I do upgrade to that anytime soon. Simply because I'm happy with the Blu-ray format, and they followed too quickly with a new upgrade format, and I'm still a little leery of it. So.
And I think I would need some kind of laser eye surgery before I could start to tell the difference anyway.
Yes. Because, I completely agree, because there does become a point until they can project the image and the sound directly into my eyeball and ears. I'm not really sure that I need it to be any sharper or clearer, and this is the important part, people, that I need to pay for you to do it again. So yeah. I'm very excited about the stuff that Sever's putting out. The Blood for Dracula. It's been so long since I've watched those two films. I can't remember if I like Blood for Dracula or Flesh for Frankenstein more.
I have to admit, I've never seen Flesh for Frankenstein.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I mean, those films, I've seen Blood for Dracula, but that was such a long time ago. That was when it was on VHS, I think. And so this announcement that they've made, because the films have been commercially unavailable for years, and the story has always been something to do with its actual director, which is Paul Morrissey, wasn't it? One of Andy Warhol's directors.
Yes.
I don't think Andy Warhol ever went to Italy or went anywhere near these films.
No, but he apparently they just slapped his name on them for publicity's sake, I think.
So there seems to have been some kind of rights issue for decades, which somehow, I mean, I'll be interested to hear the story eventually of how they've navigated that. So Severin have announced that they're doing Blood for Dracula. I'm assuming that there's a Blu-ray in the package, but you have to just buy the full thing.
Yeah.
If you want to get the Blu-ray, which is a shame for those of us who don't want the extra thing. But also, they've hinted very heavily that Vinegar Syndrome are going to do a 3D release of Flesh for Frankenstein. So that is also going to happen this year. So these films have been high on cult film fans' lists for many years, and now we're getting both of them, potentially both this year, on Blu-ray and UHD. So exciting times, but I'm not going to be buying them this time round, I don't think. I have seen hints on Facebook that there's a UK company who has also got the rights. So maybe there'll be a release over here that'll be slightly more affordable for me. But the Severin releases that I was quite excited about, that they've been teasing these announcements, is they've got a post-apocalyptic bundle of goodies that they're putting out, which has been fun. Because obviously just recently there's a French company who've done a book that is now they're called Pulse Editions, and they've translated this book into English, and it was on Kickstarter. So I was already kickstarting that one, but then obviously they've been speaking to Severin, because now Severin are putting out this book with some Blu-rays of very exciting films if you like this kind of stuff. So they've announced Raiders of Atlantis, Ruggero Deodato's film. They've also announced, what was the other one?
Warriors of the Year 2072.
Yes, the Lucio Fulci.
Mm-hmm.
And also Endgame from Joe D'Amato. So
right.
three previously unavailable on Blu-ray anyway. Post-nuclear, what I'm calling post-apocalypse films. And I'd already scheduled in for us a season of Italian post-apocalyptic films, so this is very good timing for us. So yeah, so exciting. If you're a fan of these kinds of movies, then now is the time to start selling things from around your house so that you've got enough money to buy this stuff.
Plasma, whatever you have laying around
yes,
that's not of any long-term use. You might want to go ahead and get that money stacked up. Yeah,
that's right. Just anything, children, whatever you've got. Just
if you've got some spare children to sell,
flog it all off. But anyway, so we will come back to that, I'm sure, when we get to our post-nuke season. We'll talk about those. I'm very excited to get hold of those. But we are still in our season here, Italiano nello Spazio. And so this is episode 3 of that season. And our film today, very excited to bring this film to the podcast, is called 002 Operazione Luna, also known as 002 Operation Moon. And Rod, would you like to tell the listeners who directed this classic Italian comedy?
Yes, this comedy was directed by the godfather of gore, Lucio Fulci, which may surprise a number of his fans who don't seem to know very much about his career. But yes, in the early 60s, he was known for making a lot of comedies.
Yeah, so the book that I'm using as our reference for today is Stephen Thrower's Beyond Terror, the films of Lucio Fulci. And it's funny that the first kind of 100 pages or so are taken up with comedy films.
Yep.
Because, like you said, that is a part of Fulci's career that many horror fans, I mean, myself included, were not particularly aware of until you pick up a copy of this book. So perhaps some readers would just skip over all these ones and get straight to the better known movies later on in the book. But yeah, there's this film stars a comedy duo. Now you can't see this because this is audio, but perhaps we should be using air quotes whenever we say comedy. But a very famous pair of Italian comedy performers known as Franco and Ciccio. That's Franco Francini and Ciccio Ingrassia, they're actually Sicilian comedians, and they made, this is the only film I've ever seen of theirs, but they made about 100 films, so they were massively successful from the 60s right through to the 1980s, apart from a brief period where they fell out with each other but then got back together again. So they made a lot of films, and Lucio Fulci, I believe, directed 13 films with Franco and Ciccio. So they clearly had a huge impact on Italian audiences at that time, and they were just churning them out very, very quickly, and I think we can probably both agree quite cheaply.
Most assuredly, yeah. And if this film gives us any evidence of that, then or at least of the budget levels, yeah, this is true. Of course, if you say this is the only one of their films that you've seen, right?
Yes, and possibly only one I will ever see.
Well, I have in the past struggled through a couple of others that they were involved with. One of them, because of course it was directed by Mario Bava.
Oh well, of course, yes. The girl bombs.
Yeah, exactly. Dr. Goldfoot and the girl bombs, which
that's another one that I've had in my collection for years.
Yes. Dial your expectations extraordinarily low. It does not matter that it is the only film that Mario Bava made with Vincent Price. It is a stinker.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of interesting production problems around that film, and I believe there was an Italian edit which highlighted the comedy much more, and then there's the more famous AIP edit, which is the one that we have now, which highlights Vincent Price's involvement more and sidelines those two a bit, I believe. But again, this is just from what I've read because I've never actually seen it. But also, didn't they lose the soundtrack that they'd recorded live on set because there was a lot of improvisation going on, and then somehow they lost the recordings, so they had to rewrite the whole thing in post.
I'm not sure that is all possible.
Something like that.
The experience of watching the film was painful enough without trying to learn more about it, and I'm sure that one day I will. Much as I did with this film, where it became a necessity. But I've also suffered through one other of their comedy pictures. I don't remember exactly why, but I did years and years ago. I possibly out of curiosity, but also possibly out of a masochistic desire to hurt myself. I don't know.
I mean, what's interesting with them is they seem to have worked across many different genres, and obviously, as we know, Italy loved doing lots of different genres, whatever was popular at the time. And so you can look at their films, and so just a year before this one, for example, they did another 002 film, 002 Agenti Segretissimi, which is basically two secret agents, I think it was also called. And it's a Euro spy kind of thing. They also did war films. Obviously, this one is the sci-fi one. So they were just really working across whatever they could think of a quick story, and then maybe piggyback on existing sets at Cinecittà or wherever it was they were filming.
Yeah, well, the best analog that I've heard for describing them to an audience of people who do not know their comedy or do not know their personas is that they were kind of an Italian version of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis.
Yes.
And if you've ever seen the interactions and the way those two played off of each other in their films together, you'll get a sense of what they were going for here with this comic pairing. It's kind of the same thing, really, but only more so and kind of amped up in a way that makes it patently unbelievable that two human beings would interact with each other this way if there wasn't a camera pointed at them.
Yeah.
So
because Franco, he's like the Jerry Lewis role, and Ciccio is the kind of straight man,
right?
Although he does get plenty of opportunities to mug to camera as well. But I thought, what they actually reminded me of, rather than Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, was more the those guys from Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla. Rip-offs of some rip-offs, but yeah, he's got a very expressive face, Franco, and he's quite screechy, which you get a lot with. Being not an American, I didn't grow up watching Jerry Lewis movies in quite the same way, I think, as perhaps people did in America. So even Jerry Lewis leaves me cold.
Oh, I can understand that. I really can. Yeah.
Yeah. So to see somebody doing that shtick, which in itself wasn't funny to me in the first place, is a little bit hard work. However, I will say this film did make me laugh a few times, so I don't want to just completely...
I'm going to agree with you, which is may be a shock considering how we've started this discussion, but yeah, there were a couple of laughs in this movie for me, I'll admit. Yeah.
So maybe let's dive straight to the plot. I've got a relatively short plot synopsis. The story is pretty thin. So
yeah, to say the least. Yeah. Remember, folks, these movies were being pumped out constantly by this team, and the whole idea was just to parody something else. There's basically they take something that's well known by the public, and then use the basic outline of either an actual movie that they're just playing with directly, or kind of a genre, and they just use it as a clothesline to hang whatever insane crap they can until they get to about 80 minutes, and then they call it a day. So.
Yeah, definitely. And this one is playing on the space race, which was obviously very much in the public consciousness in the 1960s, and we've already touched a bit on that on our previous episodes, but rather than any kind of rivalry as such, this is pretty much just focused specifically on the Soviet space agency, whatever they were called, I can't even remember. But we see the film begins with us watching these two cosmonauts who bear a striking resemblance to our heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And that, so right from the beginning it is set up that there are two cosmonauts who look like Franco and Ciccio, but they're not Franco and Ciccio. They are Russian, and they're going into space, and this is where the story starts. So it's all about the Russian space mission, which our hapless heroes end up getting involved in. So when Russian cosmonauts Colonel Paradovsky and Major Borovin go missing in space because they sort of lose contact with the ground control, lose contact with their craft, and the Kremlin refuses to concede that they've been lost. They don't want to lose face to the Americans. So, and this plan seems really doomed to failure right from the start. So idea.
I do love that they are. I mean, this is a good beginning for a comedy. Let's give the movie its due. It's not as if they're not thinking through some of the ideas that they're kind of employing here. Because what you have here is a situation in which almost everyone around the world in the mid-'60s would have been well aware of the Russian desire to not appear to be complete buffoons in the space race, and the fact that they had a tendency to get out over their skis as far as the capabilities of the Russian space command. They would get out there, and then there would be shall we say accidents, deaths, and horrible things would happen. So the fact that this movie plays on the public knowledge of the Russians' willingness to sweep complete disasters and death under the rug as quickly as possible and pretend they never happened is already kind of it's a good kickoff to this kind of story, I have to admit.
Yeah, so what you've said there actually just reminds me, I mean, and perhaps this film is more accurate than we might admit. So there was a story about these two Italians known as the Judica-Cordiglia brothers, and or is it Judica-Cordiglia? I don't know. I should really get better at my pronunciation. Anyway, so there were these two brothers who were amateur radio operators or radio hams, and they claimed to have recordings. They'd somehow managed to tune in to radio frequencies that they were picking up from the Soviet space program, and that they were recording astronauts from space, and that they had recordings of space missions that had ended in tragedy, like people dying. Really? Yeah, they'd got these recordings of people being sent into space, burning up, dying. And obviously the claim is that Yuri Gagarin was the first man into space. But according to these brothers, he was basically just the first one who managed to not die and came back. And that actually the Soviets had been experimenting for a long time and sending people up into space, and they'd been dying and not coming back. And obviously this is all kind of put down by some as conspiracy theories, but they've got these recordings of people suffocating in space and people disappearing off into space, getting further and further away from the Earth. They've got recordings of people burning up, coming back into the Earth's atmosphere. So, yeah, it's a really fascinating story that I read about.
Horrifying, to be honest.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I remember reading about this years ago, and it's always struck me as being quite an important story if it's true. But of course, there are various people who claim that it's not true at all. But anyway, so the idea that so the Russians have lost these guys in space at the beginning of this film, and that this is an Italian film, and also this is in 1965, and the story of the Cordiglia brothers really came out in the mid 1960s. It'd be nice to think that maybe the script writers had picked up on this story, and I don't know, maybe we're crediting them with more than they deserve, but
maybe not. I mean, like I say, it's. Perhaps. I mean, there's a specific joke in this film that points to them definitely wanting to tweak the nose of the Russian space administration about the deaths that took place as part of the Russian space shots. Yeah.
So but that's really, that makes the film more interesting than it might otherwise be. That's quite interesting. Anyway, so because they've lost these guys, they decide what they're going to do instead is search for some lookalikes who can be launched in a replica rocket, and then when they return, they can be passed off as the missing cosmonauts. So this is assuming that for every cosmonaut you have in your collection, there is somebody else out there in the world who looks just like them, and that you're going to be able to find them within the next couple of days. Like, there's a kind of big lot of ifs in this thing here, but that doesn't seem to stop.
What kills me is that I can easily have imagined that if you just cast your mind back, if this had been a Universal production in, say, the early 50s involving Abbott and Costello, I probably would already be rewatching this for the third time.
Yes, this could be a very similar kind of plot to what they might end up with. So meanwhile, in Italy, Franco and Ciccio, these guys from Sicily, and apparently in a lot of their films, they're portrayed as thieves. Mm-hmm. So we're introduced to these guys because they're breaking into this. It's either a shop or a storage locker or something. And there's a whole thing of them breaking in and stealing stuff and lots of sight gags. Then
this is going to give you a feeling of whether or not this comedy duo is for you or not. This sequence, this is where I get that. This is where I immediately got the perfect example, I think, of exactly how your generalized viewer who's not aware of this comedy duo's history is going to react to them, because I think there's some stuff while they're breaking in that's pretty funny. There's some amusing little bits and pieces where you're looking at a couple of guys who've worked together as a comedy duo for a long time at this point, for years, and they know how to play off of each other with little bits of business. But then I think once it goes into the kind of more generalized, ridiculous, over-the-top slapstick, once they're inside, is when it starts to turn into that thing with okay, this is the tone of this thing. I get it. We're not really shooting for something that we're not shooting for middle brow. We're definitely shooting for lower brow. Gotcha.
Yeah. And so whilst they're inside, some other thieves come along outside and steal their van. Mm-hmm. And so then they come out and they start cursing how you can't trust anybody these days and so on.
Which is actually some of the stuff they say at that point. Some of the dialogue at that point is actually really funny.
Yeah, because after going on about how terrible it is, their solution is to go and steal another van.
Exactly.
But they leave all their stolen goods, and then they go and get this van, and then they come back and all their other stuff has been nicked. So they've lost their van and they've lost all the stolen goods, and then they get caught by a security guard, and that's it. Then they're arrested, and their photos end up on the front page of the newspaper, which is a very helpful way to let the Russians know that you look exactly like their missing cosmonauts.
And it also seems pretty interesting that two petty thieves would end up with their faces plastered on the front page of Italian newspapers. But hey, it's a comedy. Let's roll with it.
I know. So they get spotted by the Russians, who seem to be running their spy ring out of it's like I don't know what's it, like a health spa or something. Yes. Is the front for where they've got their offices. So they spring these guys from prison by pretending to be transferring them somewhere, and they take them back to their base, which is in Rome. So they've got this secret operation in Rome, in this female health spa run by Comrade Lemedova, aka Madame Reno. So they've got there's a sort of slightly fearsome woman in charge. Mm-hmm. And at that point they get put into what is it, some kind of air pressure chamber for testing to see if they'll be able to cope with the atmospheric pressures of space.
Right. And
we get some rudimentary special effects using special lenses on the camera to make them look fat and thin and all of that kind of stuff. It's pretty... the joke dies very quickly, but they keep it going for what feels like 10 minutes.
Yes, it goes on for an extraordinarily long period of time.
So then they manage to escape by disguising themselves as women. And then we get a whole hilarious section when Franco is believed to be too masculine for a woman. And so they start injecting him with hormones to try and turn him into, it was like female hormones. And there's a whole extended sequence where he's being chased around and constantly being jabbed with syringes full of these hormones, including by Ciccio. He's also chasing him with one of the syringes. I mean, this all feels, to me, this kind of sequence would have fitted very well in a Carry-On film.
Oh, yeah,
This
that's
is
true.
kind of Carry-On level humor that we would have had in the mid-60s.
Yeah, it's the running around, the kind of completely unserious chase. It's the high/low stakes combined at the same time. It's ridiculous in any way, shape, or form, but at the same time, it can be played out for as long as you want to fill as much screen time as you need.
Yeah.
So
there's one moment when Franco runs into this room and closes the door behind him, and then he sort of breathes a sigh of relief as he leans against the door. Meanwhile, one of these women is on the other side of the door, and she stabs him in the bum through the keyhole with the syringe. And I thought that was very much a Carry-On joke.
yeah, it's a cartoon sequence. I mean, and we should stress that, you know, for the most part, these two characters, Franco and Ciccio, they're essentially cartoons running around pretending to be human beings. Let's be blunt. These are not. There's nothing to be taken seriously here, and in that spirit, like I say, there's some fun to be had, but I'm not sure that every sequence in this film works effectively for an audience that isn't I don't know, drunk or 8 years old. Take your pick. So
Yes, or Italian. I think if you were Italian, you'd perhaps find it more. More fun.
These things, Italian comedies, at least my experience with them across the ones I've seen from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they don't travel well.
No.
They don't. They seem to be very much tied to not just their time, but their place. There seems to be an almost imperceptible thing that these movies were aiming for that specifically nails them to a time and place that we can't really enjoy. We really can't put ourselves in those shoes or sit ourselves in those cinemas really, and have the kind of experience that quite obviously huge numbers of people were having. I mean, these guys made more than 100 movies. I mean, they were insanely popular, made boatloads of money for anybody making movies with them, and it's just one of those things where I mean, it's a puzzlement. It's the same way that I think a lot of people, you know, myself included, feel about a lot of comedy even today, where I still to this day cannot figure out Adam Sandler's appeal. But apparently millions upon millions of people, possibly billions as far as I can tell, think that he's just the funniest thing since somebody got kicked in the groin. And the fact that comedy is the most. This is part of a larger conversation. So I shall now portion off a section of this conversation right here for everyone really quickly, and I apologize to Adrian. Remember that comedy is the most difficult genre to recommend to another person. It is such it's difficult because what you find funny someone else may not. And in some cases, it all has to do with the circumstances under which you first see a joke or first see a bit of comedy, the mood you were in, the structures around which you came to view it in the first place. There are so many things that make something funny or not funny to you, and the fact that comedy from Italy isn't funny to an American or necessarily someone from the United Kingdom is not that much of a shock. In much the same way that I'm utterly surprised when I'm talking to someone from, say, Japan who finds some American comedies very funny. I'm actually surprised that they do, because my experience, you know, flipping things around is very different. And usually when that happens, it is because those comedies were seen by this person from another culture at a very young age. In other words, they got them when their sensibilities and their idea of what is funny and isn't were still developing to a large degree. And so these movies, if you come to them as an adult, like, you know, the two of us are, the laughs are few and far between. They're much more interesting, I think, at least to me, as a cultural artifact than as something to make me laugh. And so I will now, you know, step away from my longer treatise on the subjective qualities of comedy and step back.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, comedy is very, and particularly sort of culturally specific comedy. I mean, there's a lot of jokes in this film about the fact that these guys are Sicilian and they're saying the words wrong because they're in Rome now,
right?
And there are sort of very subtle cultural differences between Romans and Sicilians that for us, obviously just watching this with subtitles on, are completely not going to get. But some of the humor is coming from the fact that they're like fish out of water,
right?
Because they're Sicilian, but they're in the big city, and yeah, there's stuff that we just don't get, as well as obviously the more broader stuff. But yeah, it's funny, like you were saying, like for example, Mr. Bean is huge in China. I teach Chinese students, and they all love Mr. Bean.
See, I can understand that though, because
Mr. Bean is such an English thing that you don't think of that kind of stuff traveling.
The reason I think it could travel very easily is because Mr. Bean primarily is predicated on visual, in other words, non-linguistic humor. It's all built on a character who is a buffoon, but isn't a dislikable buffoon, and who is primarily getting across everything through that incredible rubber face of Rowan Atkinson. So, so that doesn't surprise me. That kind of comedy, it's like being able to enjoy something from Buster Keaton. It's very easy to access because it had to be built in such a way so that language wasn't a barrier.
Yeah, no, that's true. So we get finally, so once these guys get recaptured and prepared, they still don't know exactly, no one's told them why they are there or where they're going. And so they're sent into this rocket, and they seem to think, they don't even realize that they're in space. They think that they're in prison. It's a different kind of prison. But they're put in this rocket, and we get proper, I'm assuming this is proper stock footage of rockets launching. It's not miniatures. It looks like real rocket footage.
Yeah.
So we see them blast.
There's some actual rocket footage and stuff. Yeah.
And we see them blast off into space, and then we get this sequence, which is why this film is in this season, because we do get maybe 10 minutes or so of Franco and Ciccio actually in space. Now, what's weird, I thought, and obviously this is for budgetary reasons, but from just a scientific point of view, makes no sense at all. In their rocket, they have artificial gravity.
As far as we can tell.
They're just sitting there in their seats and everything's fine. Nothing is floating around at all, which is maybe why they don't realise that they're in space. But then they discover there's quite a long, relatively funny sequence where they discover all this food in the rocket, and it's all different pills. And Franco is really hungry, so he's got a pill for pasta, he's got another pill for olive oil and vinegar, and he's got all the tomatoes. He's making himself a full meal, and he's cooking it all up. There's a pill for hot water, and and he's preparing this meal for himself just with all these pills, which I thought was pretty funny. But then eventually they decide to go out for a spacewalk, and this is where we properly get to some, I'm going to call it sub-Margheriti spacewalking. I mean, considering Margheriti's now made 2 films in space, one of which we just talked about, with some relatively effective sequences in space. Here, well, I don't know, how would you describe their floating around in space in this sequence?
I would describe it as poorly done. No, I would describe it as, or I would describe it as attempted humor, which is very much the entire basis of the film. It's silliness. It's just about as believable as the rest of the film. It's well, first of all, it's interesting that it seems that one of the reasons this film was built the way it was built was to get them into this sequence. And so I was kind of looking forward to what they would do with this comedy duo, playing around in, supposed zero G, what kind of comedy shenanigans they would get up to. And I have to say I was disappointed because it's not funny. There are a couple of funny moments in this movie, and them bumbling around in outer space it's all just a visual gag that they don't seem to have anything to add to.
Yeah, and did you notice, the copy of the film that we're watching, this is not a film that's currently sort of easily commercially available. So it's on YouTube, and we managed to find a copy with English subtitles, and the picture quality isn't bad actually. It's a lot better. Yeah,
it's taken from an Italian television broadcast, I believe.
Yeah, so it looks okay, but it's not pin sharp. But even in the version that we're watching, you can very clearly see the cables that these guys are hanging on. Like just the shooting of this sequence, they should have at least asked Margheriti for a little bit of help, or somebody who'd done this before.
Well, see, that when you're talking about that, I agree with you, and that's one of the jokes I kept waiting for them to kind of tug on, which is to kind of knowingly wink at the audience by having one of them by having them have to like adjust the cables to get back into the spacecraft or something like that. In other words, some kind of meta joke that would have made all of this flailing about be more interesting. And the fact that they didn't do something like that was kind of a disappointment, because it's like, oh well, you got at least play with it, I guess. But I guess they're attempting to and picture this in giant air quotes, folks, maintain the illusion. So yeah, I know.
Yeah. So meanwhile, back down on the ground at Mission Control, they've lost contact with these guys as well, and there's a lot of panic going on down there, and Franco and Ciccio are just sort of alone in space for a little bit, and then they get back into the space pod and eventually manage to make contact again, and so they are then brought back to Earth. But meanwhile, the wives of the original cosmonauts have turned up at mission headquarters, demanding to be there for their husbands when their husbands return. So,
yes.
So this is where there's another great extended opportunity for comedy. So our heroes come back to Earth. They're immediately bundled into a car. I think there's some photos taken of them, obviously, like the press, so they can see that it's supposedly the real Paradosky and Borovin have come back. But then they're put in a car with these women, and then I'm not entirely sure where they're driven to. I don't think it's their house, unless they all live together in the same house.
It appears to be some kind of hotel room.
Yeah, it's sort of like a barracks or something. Yeah, somewhere on a Russian base, or because you've got separate rooms, but then there's a joint kind of living area and a kitchen. It's like a lovely house, but I don't know. They're all in there anyway. But so the Russians just expect these guys to go back with their wives. No, the women are speaking Russian. These guys are speaking Italian. The Russians don't really seem to have thought this through about what they were going to do at this point. So now we get a lot of comedy where the guys don't know who these women are, and initially they try and snog the wrong women, and because they don't know that they're supposed to be their wives. And then I have to admit, Adrian,
before we go past that, I have to admit that the scene with the two of them attempting to figure out, well, they decide which one they're most attracted to, and then they make their moves. The scene where the wives are so confused because the wrong husband is attempting to kiss them. Yeah. I honestly found that whole sequence pretty funny, because the actresses and let's give them their due. The comedy duo here really know how to play that effectively, and it's actually funny.
Yeah, I think this whole thing with the wives is probably the funniest bit of the film.
Yes.
There's a lot of comedy business going on in this sequence, but of course, meanwhile, whilst all this is going on, the real Borodovsky and Borovin have made contact again. They've just been floating around in space this whole time, and they're not dead. They've returned to Earth. The Russians are trying to hold them. It all gets a little bit, what's it called?
Squirrely? Weird?
Yeah, well, yes. No, what's that film called? Is it Capricorn?
Oh, Capricorn 1, yes.
So they're trying to hold the real astronauts and stop them from going public. So they sort of locked them up somewhere, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of that. So they have to break out. It's interesting the way that Franco and Ciccio are playing the Russian cosmonauts. Like, they look like they could just be serious actors. Franco, when he's not grimacing and pulling that big Jerry Lewis face, he just looks like a very serious, normal guy.
Yeah.
And I thought that was quite fun, that you actually get to see him not doing comedy, and just seeing what that would be like. But anyway, they eventually find their way to their wives, which makes me wonder whether they do all just live in the same house, because they knew where to go to find them.
Okay, that's a good point. And my God, you found a plot hole in this film.
Yeah, just the first one of many, possibly. So the wives, meanwhile, the wives are very puzzled by their husbands, but they put it down to space sickness, and they think that they'll get back to normal eventually. And they end up they're all in bed with the women, and that all seems fine. But then, so the Russian husbands come back, and as you can imagine, this leads to a lot of running and chasing around. There are scenes where they're confronting each other. There's a little bit of split screen, which is done. It's done very well, I think. Actually, the special effects when they are in the same shot, mostly it's done by looking at somebody from behind and using body doubles and so on. But there is some split screen stuff which is pretty effective. But yeah, they end up fighting with each other, and the women are very confused and keep fainting, and they're very bewildered. The Russians turn up, the Russian ministers or whoever they are, the space guys.
Space guys.
Yeah, using the official terms. They eventually come along and they grab the two Sicilians to send them back to Rome. But of course, as we find out from the end of the film, maybe they've grabbed the wrong guys.
Yes.
Well, they have. I'll just give it away. They have. I mean, that's obviously the last joke is that Franco and Ciccio are back on the streets trying to rob buildings, but this time they're in Moscow. And
they seem to be having just as much luck as before.
Yeah,
yes.
So they're right back in terms of their life opportunities, they're right back where they started, only now they're also covered in snow. And that's the end of the film.
Pleasantly, blissfully, yes. Because I don't know that. Well, I'll just ask it straight out. Did you enjoy watching this film?
Yeah, I think I did.
Okay, good.
I don't think it wasn't as painful as I was expecting. Perhaps I'd braced myself for the worst. So then I was pleasantly surprised when some of it was actually pretty funny. And just thinking of the kind of British equivalents that we had of this kind of film, there are a lot of movies like this being made in Britain in the 60s. Not only the Carry On films, but people like Norman Wisdom and Franco. I don't know if Norman Wisdom really films have travelled across the pond.
I know of them, but I've never seen one. Yeah,
I mean, like another very popular performer, and his character is quite similar in some ways to Franco. So it kind of reminded me of that. So perhaps that's why I was a bit softer on the film than maybe I might otherwise have been. I mean, what about you? Would you be prepared to watch any more Franco and Ciccio films?
In general, no, I wouldn't. But then I think you're right. I think I had a similar experience with this movie. My curiosity factor was high. I mean, this is an early Lucio Fulci film before he moved into thrillers and giallos and then eventually into horror pictures. He's a filmmaker I enjoy exploring the career of, because you can see, especially here, you can see some of the skills that he was learning and was pretty much already adept at moving forward. But like you, I had braced myself for bamboo shoots under my fingernails, essentially. And when I discovered that it wasn't nearly as bad as that, it was actually that there were actually moments that were pretty funny. Don't get me wrong, there are long stretches that are supposed to be funny that I didn't find funny, but I'll admit that the film being in black and white gave it a certain charm to me. Because I'm an old film fan, I guess that's part of it. I'm not positive, but that's probably one of the things that kept me engaged in a few areas where I would have probably been better off not being as engaged as I was. But yeah, I laughed more than a few times. I don't find the mugging of. I don't find the constant facial mugging, the ridiculous takes to the camera, the insane playing to an audience, the breaking of the fourth wall. And I don't find that to be at all funny.
And his constant screeching of Ciccio, Ciccio. I'm tempted to edit together a little compilation of those.
Lord, warn me if you do.
If I do that, it's going in right now.
Ciccio! 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 Ciccio!
People,
there you go.
People, he won't do it, so I'll apologize for him.
I've done it.
It's a bad idea in every way, shape, and form. And now
they're recovering now. They've just heard it. But yeah, there's a lot of that. Which is, I suppose that's kind of, is that a Jerry Lewis type thing? Does he run around shouting for whatever name Dean Martin's character has in that?
Yes. That is an aspect of the Martin and Lewis films. And indeed the stage show that their personas were crafted in, but like I say, maybe this is just part of me being an American and having experienced those films at a younger age. They're a lot less grating, and there's a lot less of it to my memory. Don't get me wrong, Jerry Lewis, when he struck out on his own, for every 5 movies Jerry Lewis made, there's one that's actually worth watching now in the 21st century. His hit or miss ratio is pretty bad, but when Martin and Lewis were a team, that was Jerry Lewis's job, was to be the clown, to be that rubber-faced lunatic who you weren't absolutely sure had not been kicked in the head by a horse at a young age. He's just not, he's either not bright or not swift enough on the uptake to be able to understand the situations he's placed within. But this is kind of that, at least to my experience. I'm far from being a comedy movie expert, for God's sake, but this seems a bit dialed up to 11 for my tastes.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm thinking, because they did films in so many different genres, that maybe I'll be able to work some more Franco and Ciccio films into future seasons.
Oh God! How did you say that so calmly, and yet it still sounds like a threat? So,
they definitely did a Euro spy one. I don't know if they did a post-apocalyptic one, but I'm going to have a look.
I'm willing to bet that they probably did not. Well, just really quickly, I'd like to point out that an actress that I have a lot of time for is in this movie. Maria Silva plays Dr. Frausnick. She's someone that was in Tombs of the Blind Dead and at least 2 or 3 Paul Naschy's films. She was in Curse of the Devil and The Mummy's Revenge. Oh, and she was also in Leon Klimovsky's incredible film I Hate My Body, which if you've still not seen, seek it out. There's a movie that's crying out for rediscovery here in the 21st century. Let me tell you, but
because this film was a Italian Spanish co-production, so that would make sense.
Which was a bit of a surprise for me. I didn't realize that this comedy duo's productions were kind of a split nationality co-production kind of thing. But I guess this may be an instance where it was everybody wanting to get in here, all these producers wanting to get in here because it was just a gold mine.
Yeah. Well, maybe their comedy traveled quite well in Spain.
Well, I think it may
well
have, because to be honest, the couple of Spanish comedies I've seen from at least from the 1970s, the tone is similar in that nothing, there's absolutely no way to mistake anything in a Spanish or Italian comedy, from what I can tell, as reality. There's not an instance where you're going, yes, I can see how you would spray that kind of foam all over everyone's face because you suddenly feel as if you want to try beef, or just whatever insane situation they're putting themselves in. Who knows? But the cast really is working hard, I have to admit. No matter how little I like the comedy mugging, the cast is at least doing a good job with what the material asks of them, and I can't complain about that. So give credit where credit's due.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there are more. There's more pluses than minuses. This is a film that, again, not really commercially available, and it probably should be.
I'm a little surprised at that, considering I look around and it's like right now I think you can get almost every Abbott and Costello film on Blu-ray in a huge box set and things of that nature. And these are the kind of movies that I'm utterly surprised that there's not some kind of huge Franco and Ciccio at least DVD box set that has been done with
although I would imagine that English subtitles may not be a priority on a set like that.
Oh, I would agree, but I'm just saying that as something that would just be available in Europe at the very least, you would think that there would be enough of a nostalgia interest in these kinds of things to generate that kind of a release. But man, I guess not. I wonder, and this is a question that I have no answer to. I'm curious as to how they as a comedy team are thought of in modern day Italy or modern day Europe in general. In other words, are they looked upon with great affection because people grew up seeing this stuff on late night television, or even Saturday matinees, whatever they may, however they may have seen them in second, third, fourth run, especially on television. Are they beloved still, or is this something that's almost completely forgotten in Europe? I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, well, me too. I have no idea. If anyone who's listening, if you're Italian, why not contact us and let us know how Franco and Ciccio are considered today in Italy. It would be really interesting to find out whether
if they're considered at all. Fondly.
Yeah, or just completely forgotten. That would be interesting to find out. But I think we've probably covered everything that there is to say about Operazione Luna. Any final thoughts from you?
It is fascinating to see the beginnings, the things that Lucio Fulci would use later in his thrillers, the kinds of the energy level, the ability to cross-cut, the knowledge of how to make these certain, to make sequences like say the ridiculous comic chase sequence in this, to make them work. The fact that even here you see the beginnings of his capabilities for generating suspense, even when it's about to be undercut by something comedic, and it's fun to see these early films by Lucio Fulci, and that's my main takeaway from this, is just how interesting it is to see someone who became a giant in the industry, depending on your view of the genres that he became most famous for, to see his beginnings and realize that they're not really quite so humble. I mean, he was making some big name films. These were considered huge hits at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely recommend to anyone who doesn't have it, recommend Stephen Thrower's book Beyond Terror.
Yes, great book.
Films of Lucio Fulci, which is very thorough. And gives a lot of attention actually to these early films, which I found really interesting, because they're the ones that I know so little about in terms of Fulci's overall career. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Please do get in touch with us. We're available for for your comments. You can email us and you can tweet at us. We're also on Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. Next time, we are going to be talking about possibly the first classic film, proper classic film, of the podcast. So that's something to look forward to in a couple of weeks' time. But Rod, thank you so much for sitting through what could have been a very painful experience and finding something positive to say at the other end of it.
Yes, shockingly not as painful as I thought. Glad to do it, Adrian.
Thank you everybody for listening, and I think we'll leave you, before we get to the podcast theme, I'll leave you with some of Franco's singing. I'll let him sing us out with the theme from Operazione Luna, and then we will get to our own theme, and then we will talk to you all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Non ti devi preoccupare, amico mio, obbediscimi che al resto penso io. La rapina con lo scasso, in materia sono un asso, ti do un premio se le cose vanno lisce.
Ciccio, a schifo finisce!
Fare fuori un furgoncino sopra il quale sistemare poi il bottino. Se c'è un po' di vicinanza, ostentare noncuranza o la guardia comunale si insospettisce. Hai paura?
Si capisce,
Pensa ad altro.
non mi riesce,
Guasti tutto.
mi ringresce, già mi vedo con un bel vestito a strisce.
Il lucchetto mi resiste un sol minuto. Presto sbrigati, ho bisogno del tuo aiuto. C'è una torcia dentro il sacco, su collabora per pacco, entreremo più furtivi delle bisce.
Ciccio, te lo dicevo io, a schifo finisce.